Good morning, everybody. We are in Acts chapter 1, and we're going to do verses 20 all the way through 26 today. I know we'll get to the end of the chapter. Record-breaking. And we already read a couple of these verses, but we're going to read them again. So in verse 20, it says, "For it is written in the book of Psalms, let his dwelling place be desolate, and let no one live in it, and let another take his office. Therefore, of these men who have accompanied us all the time that the Lord Jesus went in and out among us, beginning from the baptism of John to that day when he was taken up from us, one of these must become a witness with us of his resurrection." And they proposed two, Joseph and Barsabas, whose surname was Justus, and Matthias, and they prayed and said, "O Lord, who knows the hearts of all, show us which one of these two you have chosen to take part in the ministry and apostleship from which Judas by transgression fell, that he might go to his own place." And they cast their lots, and the lot fell on Matthias, and he was numbered with the 11 apostles. So, I jokingly titled this A-postles and B-postles because that's kind of what we see these days are A-postles and B-postles. So right off the beginning, Judas has fallen, right? Judas has fallen away from the 12, and they're trying to find someone to fulfill the ministry with them. They give the qualifications here in the chapter. It says they're going to find someone to be among the 12. That person had to be a witness of his resurrection. It had to be someone who was with them from the baptism of John all the way up until that time. So they were looking for someone with specific qualifications to be one of those original 12 apostles. You go through and you see that they picked these two guys that we never heard their names before. We don't know much else about them up until this point. But the idea was that initial group was a group of people that were going to go and they were going to share the gospel. They were going to be given unique gifts. They were going to be the ones who had composed the New Testament. They were going to do a whole lot of things. Later on, we're going to find other people referred to as apostles. Barnabas is referred to as an apostle. Paul is referred to as an apostle. Others are referred to as apostles. But were they part of the 12? Once again, if you go by the Bible, the 12 were the ones who were there, and this was the qualification. They saw the risen Lord. They were there from the beginning through his earthly ministry so that they could testify firsthand what they saw. You see, the idea of apostle, the word in the Greek, it's one who is sent out, who has been witness of Jesus. And if people had not actually witnessed the risen Lord, they had not witnessed him on his earthly ministry, they wouldn't be able to fulfill that job description. And so they want to find one guy, so they've got their team of 12, which we see in the Bible is a number of earthly leadership. We see 12 tribes, we see 12 disciples, and 12 apostles. But there was way more than 12 disciples, because he sends out 70 disciples at a later date, and there was obviously many more people who were sharing the gospel. There was 120 in the room at the time of this meeting. But Jesus had groups in which he entrusted certain responsibilities, and he gave certain power in order to make those things take place. Inside the 12 apostles, we even see what you might call the inner three: Peter, James, and John. On numerous occasions, Jesus would take Peter, James, and John, and sometimes Andrew, Peter's brother, would tag along, but they would also have an inner circle. And as church tradition, and even in the Bible, we see Peter always seems to take a dominant role. He was kind of the first among equals. They were all the apostles, but he seemed to pave the way and always take a leadership position. Tradition has it that Peter was a good amount older than the other apostles. Peter was probably closer to Jesus' age, while the rest of the apostles were quite young. I've heard that John, for instance, would have been something like 19 or 20. He would have been right about the right age where a rabbi would have called them and asked them to follow. And so that's the idea, is these guys were the A-postles. So I jokingly mentioned B-postles. What's up with a B-postle? Well, when you look in Ephesians chapter 4, He says he gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers. Now, right off the bat, we have 4 ministries here. Many people refer to it as 5, but it's really only 4. Because in the Greek, and this is something that's very, very, very clear if you read Greek. And I don't really read Greek. I can read it, don't necessarily understand it all the way, but I'm learning. And one thing is that apostles is followed by the word and in the Greek, and it's de, D-E. And then it's de prophets, de evangelists, de pastors, poimon, a shepherd, kai, teacher. Now, kai is another word for and in the Greek, but it's a different kind of and. This means de is next in succession. This, then this, then this. Kai is bringing them together and turning them into one. It's called the Granville-Sharp rule, if you're a nerd and you like to write that stuff down. So the Granville-Sharp rule is that pastor and teacher is one ministry, that the ones who are shepherding the flock are also the ones who are teaching the flock. So then we have these other 4 ministries. What's up with them and where do they apply today? Well, I'm just going to focus on apostle because we don't have time to cover all these things in depth. So prophets and evangelists, another day. Pastor, teacher, you're probably pretty well familiar with. But what's up with apostles? Well, again, the word means sent out one, right? It's someone who's sent out with the message. In many ways, today, the role that best fits this is a missionary church planter. When we look at Paul the Apostle, when we look at Barnabas, when we look at apostles who weren't named among the 12, that original group, they were men who traveled around and planted churches. That's what they did. They weren't pastors, and they were different than pastors. And so sometimes we have people who pastor a church and maybe take on that title of apostle, but that's not what an apostle does. And missionaries are still a little different because apostles, they moved around. That was the idea. They moved around, they planted churches, and they kept going. But a missionary today is probably the closest thing we can find. They're sent out ones. People sent out to go out with the message, because you don't see the word missionary in the Bible here, do you? It's just not a word that's used. But doesn't mean it's not a role. It's really what you might call the B-postles. They're ones who are sent out to go plant churches. You're going to have a little bit of pastor, a little bit of evangelist, a little bit of prophet. I mean, you're kind of gifted in a few different things to really have that calling to go out and plant churches. Where a pastor is supposed to stay plugged in. You're going to find a pastor more gifted in teaching and more gifted in shepherding over a group of people that they're going to invest in and stay with, versus these apostles, sent out ones. They're going to be going out and spreading the word all around. So there's a quick and fast A-postle, B-postle. Today that word is thrown around. I will say this, is I believe there are apostolic giftings, people gifted with these types of things. The one thing that seems to always irk me a little bit is most often the people who want to take on that title of apostle, it's usually tied in with a bunch of other stuff. And I'm just going to share this from my own personal experience, is that most often those who I see with that title, I know even locally there are people who have that title and they require to be called by it. You must refer to me as apostle this. And it's just, there's a little bit of a top-down power trip going on sometimes. Now, I don't know every person out there calling themselves apostle, so I can't speak for everyone. I'm just talking in my own personal experience, those whom I've seen and what I've heard of in personal stories. And the other thing is, again, is that a lot of times you also find a lot of other specific false teachings that usually get wrapped up in there. So the word apostle, I would never feel comfortable taking it on myself, and I wouldn't necessarily call someone else one, but we definitely see it. Again, missionaries, church planters, people who are going out and spreading the message, moving from place to place. If you want to really learn about apostles from the apostles, check out the Didache. That'll be my closing nugget for some of the people who really want to dig deep and really want to understand. The Didache it's probably the earliest early church father writing that we have. Okay? These early church father writings are amazing People like Polycarp, we have so much of his stuff. Polycarp was the disciple of John. So John used to tell Polycarp all of his stories, and Polycarp shares them. So here's the catch, is these aren't the Bible. If something in one of those writings contradicted the Bible, I would have to reject it, because the Bible is perfect, inerrant, unchanged, unaltered in all its ways. And so if something contradicts that or comes along that's new or different, we need to reject it. So I can't say that the early church fathers and every writing of theirs is something we got to take as gold, but it is quite rich to hear the teachings of guys who are right there in that first group. The Didache is one of the earliest writings. I can't tell you if it really was, but it is attributed to the apostles. Tradition is they wrote this as something to inform and educate the church. In it, they give the test of a prophet and the test of an apostle. I don't have it memorized. I have it written down somewhere, but it's things like this. They say if an apostle comes into your midst and he requests food other than what you serve him, he is a false apostle. If he comes looking for accommodation and he stays more than 2 days, he's a false apostle. So the earliest writings of the church we have, aside from the Bible, makes it very clear that apostles are supposed to be very selfless, typically poor people who are traveling around just living off the hospitality of others, but very, very humbly. And I would say today, that test probably still can and should be used. These are not people dressed up nice, got all the good stuff, looking good, and living the high life. No, they were people living migrantly, moving around, living off the hospitality of the church, but taking what they were given with thanks and just quickly moving on to the next place, always getting the word of the Lord out there. So, the Didache, Google it. It's all free online. All the early church fathers stuff is all free online for you to read. So, check it out. God bless you guys. Have a great day.